Okay, well, everybody, thank you all for joining us today to learn more about turtles in New Hampshire. This is just the second program of our spring Lunch and Learn training program. My name is Barbara Richter, and I'm the Executive Director at the New Hampshire Association of Conservation Commissions. And for those of you who don't know, NHACC, we're a nonprofit organization working to support conservation commissions so that they can be successful in protecting their local natural resources. So we have a great program here today. Our presenters are Josh Megyesy from New Hampshire Fish and Game and Lauren White from UNH, University of New Hampshire. So Josh is a wildlife biologist with the New Hampshire Fish and Game. He's a turtle specialist with extensive experience monitoring and managing populations of blandings, spotted, wood, and eastern box turtles. He also participates in regional turtle working groups with other federal, state, and NGO biologists to conserve turtle populations at the range-wide scale. Joining Josh will be Lauren White, a graduate student from UNH, University of New Hampshire. She's been studying turtles in New Hampshire as part of her thesis, focusing on reducing road mortality of turtles, specifically the Blandings turtle. So I think this research will really be of interest to conservation commissions today and a way that they can better protect turtles in their communities. So again, I want to thank Josh and Lauren for joining us today to really help us keep us up to date with what towns can do to better protect turtles. Just a few quick items before we begin. We will be recording this program, so I will send out the link to the recording tomorrow. We ask that everybody remain muted to ensure good audio quality for everyone. It's a large group, so any background noise can be distracting. We invite you to ask questions, but you can use the chat box at the bottom of your screen there, or you can raise your hand and we should be able to get to questions at the end of the program. There's a large group coming in right now. So again, thank you all for joining us. And Josh, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Barbara, for the introduction, and thanks for having me, and Lauren. So yeah, I'm going to talk about at-risk turtle species in New Hampshire. I want to talk a little bit about ecology, and then threats, and then some of the conservation actions that we're implementing in the state. At-risk turtle species are either state-listed, threatened or endangered, or special concern, or SGCN, species of greatest conservation need. So I guess to start, hold on, let me make sure that I'm queued up here. So I'm going to be talking about the rare turtles in the state. But I wanted to point out that, and I'm not going to get into all of the species in New Hampshire. We have 7 of them, native species anyway. But it's important to point out that all reptiles and amphibians are declining globally. And so the work that we do to protect at-risk turtle species is also going to benefit some of the more common or relatively secure species. You never know when the next thing could hit, whether it's disease or habitat impacts that could have a large negative impact on some of the populations we have here. So we don't want to take the common ones for granted either. So I want to start by talking about Blandings turtle, and this has been the species that sort of triggered the grant that Lauren and I have both worked on with an EPA grant looking at turtle crossings, and Lauren's going to talk more about that at the end. So I've been working with Blandings turtles since 2013. Blandings turtles are a southeastern species, southern half of the state, really, but the largest concentration of them is in the southeastern part of the state, which also happens to be the fastest developing part of the state. So Blandings turtles rely on a variety of different wetlands, and so they typically don't just stay in one wetland any given period of time. They tend to bounce around a lot throughout the landscape. They really rely on a diversity of wetlands that include shrub swamps, bogs, fens, emergent wetlands, and particularly vernal pools, which tend to be their early wetland hangouts where they can eat frog eggs, salamander eggs. They also tend to congregate in those vernal pools for mating as well. And then they'll move on to different wetlands throughout the season. They typically will follow a fairly predictable path once you take a look at them and study them over time. Back in 2011, we started monitoring Blanding's turtles in the state, and we used these large hoop traps that we bait with sardines, and we live trap them. We do these in large landscapes where we can put these traps in a variety of different wetlands and get a picture of where these turtles are and how they're using the habitats. And so we did 2 rounds of monitoring, 5 years apart, to try to detect any trends and changes in their population. Spotted turtles are another at-risk species. They are a state-threatened species. Blanding's is endangered, by the way. Spotted turtles use very similar habitats. So they rely on the same kind of variety, vernal pools included. They're also a very long-lived species, as well as Blanding's turtles and all the rare turtles in New Hampshire, with late age of reproduction. So some up to 14 years old before they can lay their first clutch of eggs. And so we did the same thing with Blanding's turtles that we did with, or we did the same thing with spotted turtles that we did with Blanding's turtles, where we used traps to capture them and try to identify large densities or intact populations throughout the state. Third is the wood turtle, and this is a stream turtle. They're a statewide species that relies on rivers and streams, and so they typically use slow, windy rivers and streams with usually sand, gravel kind of substrate. They're not in the higher elevations, so when you look at that map, you can see that they're pretty much absent from the higher elevations of the White Mountains, but they're all the way up to the far reaches of the state and all the way down to the border. This species, we typically do visual surveys, so we walk along streams in the early mid-spring and actually search for them as they're coming out of the streams. They're very terrestrial in the warmer months, so they'll leave the stream, and a lot of them won't even go back to the stream until it starts to get cooler in September. So they make use of the floodplain, upland forests near the stream, and some go even further, especially females. They're also prized in the illegal pet trade. So this is something that we're keeping an eye on, and it's definitely something that we haven't seen here in the state, but other states are reporting, and we're seeing large-scale confiscations of all the at-risk turtle species, but wood turtles in particular, because they tend to hibernate communally, emerge communally, and so collectors can target these locations and collect a large amount of turtles in one shot. And these are going to markets all around the world, and that's typically where they're picking them up in the confiscations. This is a typical, well, a pristine habitat. These really windy streams with point bars. The females will nest on those point bars or beaches in the stream. When they're not present, they'll leave and go find sandy areas elsewhere. So I want to talk a little bit about movement before I get into the threats. So as I mentioned, they're all very terrestrial. They move between wetlands and streams and utilize the upland habitats extensively, either for nesting or just being up in the woods, foresting or foraging or estivating. When it gets really hot, they'll burrow down under the leaf litter in the woods and stay there for days, some even weeks, until they move to another wetland. And so the the movements in between these wetlands are when they're at the greatest risk of either road mortality or being picked up by a predator or even a human. So I wanted to show you a population that we studied where, and this is just a snapshot of, and hopefully you can see my mouse. I made it really big so you could see it. So this is 1 year. This particular female did the same movement for 2 years that we tracked her. But she basically hibernated in essentially what is a vernal pool. We picked her up in early April. We put a radio transmitter on her, and then we followed her throughout the season. And so she went from a vernal pool to another vernal pool to a big shrub swamp, so some forested wetlands, to an open emergent wetland, crossed a trail to some other forested wetlands, and then made it all the way over to this residential area, more of like a hayfield kind of situation, where she nested in June. This is about a mile. And so she laid her eggs, and then she went all the way back. And so by September, she was back in that vernal pool where she hibernated. And she did the same thing the year after. So that's quite a movement for an animal that, historically we always considered to be an aquatic animal. But we now know that they use the uplands extensively, and they don't stop moving. And each season has a different habitat that they typically move to. Getting to wood turtles, we did the same exact thing where we put transmitters on a population of turtles and we followed them around. This is a this is a collection of about 8 individuals that use this stream and hibernate in it. You can see that they kind of all congregate in this area, but they left the stream and they just went up into these upland areas and they spent the entire summer up there. The females went a little bit further, and you can see that one of these females made it out to the edge of this field, eventually crossed this road and went out to another entirely different river, this main stem here. And she used that for about a month, but she ended up nesting over in this area. And so this was just kind of giving you a snapshot of how far these turtles will move around the landscape. And, it doesn't matter whether there's a road there, a development, or anything else, they're going to find a way. And so that puts them at a higher risk of mortality in a human-dominated landscape. Lastly, I wanted to talk about eastern box turtle real quickly. So eastern box turtles are really restricted to the very southern border in New Hampshire. So this is the farthest north that they go in the Northeast. They're a completely terrestrial turtle. They hibernate down in the soil in the wintertime. Until 2014, we didn't really know that we had native box turtles. We had followed a couple around, but they seemed like they might have been released pets. We put a transmitter on a female. We followed her around for a couple years, found a couple more. The next year after that, we found a couple more. And now we're up to 3 populations in the southern part of the state that we track every year. So it's pretty exciting to sort of be on the forefront of just really trying to understand this peripheral population in the state and how it connects to the southern, like Massachusetts populations in the northeast part of their state. So that's ongoing, and we'll be continuing that work into the future and looking at other areas as well in the western part of the state where it connects to some other potential Vermont populations as well. So now I'll get into the threats. And so, as I mentioned, road mortality is a big issue, and one that prompted the grant that Lauren and I both worked on. So nobody consulted with the turtles before we built roads, and so there's a wetland over here. There's a wetland over here. Everybody assumed that turtles stay in those wetlands, so you put a road down here, everything's going to be fine. We now know that they move between those wetlands, and so we have roads all throughout the state that bisect wetlands and different vernal pools and upland habitats, like nesting areas that they use. Sometimes roadsides or even nesting areas for turtles. So in residential and commercial development is also a big issue because once something's developed, that habitat is pretty much gone. So the turtle doesn't really have access to it. If they do access it, the chances of surviving is pretty slim. This wetland here in the middle, you can see is, fairly intact, but everything around it is completely boxed in by development, roads, businesses, everything else. The turtles that exist there are what we call the walking dead. They'll live a long time, 75 to 80 years in some cases, but there's no recruitment, so they're not having any successful reproduction. They're slowly dying on roads. Eventually, they'll be extirpated, and in this particular location, we're now seeing invasive or non-native turtle species like red-eared sliders and yellow-bellied sliders moving in, and probably will take over that wetland completely in time. And those are released pets, just so you know. So collection, again, is becoming a big issue. They're easily collectible because they're not venomous. They're easy to grab because of the shell. They can bite, but easy to avoid. People love turtles. And there's a demand for them in international markets for food, medicine, and also pets. And so we're seeing some of these turtles, like this wood turtle in particular, where they're just getting these really high prices for them in these black markets. So it's something we're going to watch very carefully in the state. And I'm part of a working group nationally that is trying to develop protocols for, well, outreach, but also like, outreach to like border patrol and trade ports and law enforcement, so we can kind of get this into the forefront a little bit more. As I mentioned, these turtles are very long-lived, and they have a late age of sexual reproduction. And so this chart sort of shows, it gives you an idea of why conservation is so hard. When you lose a population or a population is dwindled, it takes a really long time to recover it if you even can. So this is a white-tailed deer. You can see after 17 years, it's produced 912 young. For moose, it's 681 after 17 years. For bear, it's 25. For turtles, some of them aren't even laying their first clutch of eggs until 17. And then all of those eggs need to survive raccoons digging them up, and those hatchlings need to make it to water before the winter time and not get eaten by everything that's out there that wants to eat them, from bullfrogs to crows to blue jays to raccoons, skunks, you name it, and even people picking them up. So it's a challenge, and we really need to protect the populations that we do have from declining further. Land protection is key, and it's the highest ranked conservation action for turtles in New Hampshire and throughout the region, really. So once land is developed, you just have a loss of habitat from sometimes you have wetlands and vernal pools that are actually filled, but they're fragmented, and so you have more road traffic. Turtles need to cross lawns where there's dogs and people, and subsidized predation becomes more of an issue. So where people go, raccoons go. Raccoons are like number one nest predator for turtles. They're specialized in smelling them, finding them, digging them up, and eating them. So creating nesting habitat is another strategy that we implement. And so this is fairly expensive and takes some time. We've been doing a lot of this on state land where we have permission and the ability to do it because it's already protected. We bring in sand. Sometimes we need to clear a lot, do a timber harvest, and we spread this sand out for turtles to nest in. And we do them in areas where we've studied them for better part of a decade. And we put cameras on them to monitor them, so we understand the effectiveness. And And it's amazing to see after 1 year of putting sand down how quickly turtles will find these areas and start using them. And then the years after that, they just use them more and more. They take maintenance, and again, it's expensive, so we're always trying to find funding to put these things together. And but nesting habitat in the state is it's pretty limited. So finding areas that are open, sunny, and sandy are becoming fewer and fewer, and those particular areas tend to be areas that have been disturbed and developed, and so that's not a great place for a female turtle to be hanging out. So I don't want to get into crossings and culverts and aquatic organism passage too much because I want Loren to have the opportunity to talk to that. But like we have spent a lot of time, assessing some of these crossings and trying to figure out a way to, improve the ability of turtles to get under roads so that they don't have to cross and get hit. In combination with things like turtle crossing signs that warn drivers of the potential for turtles crossing. This is just an example of a really bad culvert where it's perched, so there's no water, the fish can't get through it, turtles can't get up onto them and through. They're also very small and dark, and turtles don't want to go through that. Larger open bottom culverts like this one with this natural substrate on the bottom is much better and more likely that a turtle is going to find its way through it. And again, Lauren will talk more about the other design features. I just wanted to direct you to a couple websites. northeastturtles.org and blanningsturtle.org has a bunch of resources on it from best management practice documents that include how to create nesting habitat, forestry practices, agricultural practices. It has all 4 species that I've talked about. It also has all the approaches for monitoring that we do and all those protocols, and a ton of other links that you should check out. So I'll just take any other questions and before we kick it over to Lauren.
Great. Thanks so much, Josh. We do have a couple questions here, and it's interesting. There's always some good advice within the group as well. The first question was from Brenda, who asked about a baby turtle, if it's been captured for whatever reason, can it be reintroduced into the wild after it grows up a little bit?
So, so there's 2 parts to that. The first one is if you find yourself with a turtle hatchling, especially if it's an at-risk species, you should get it to a rehabber. And so New Hampshire Turtle Rescue is who you want to get it to. Dallas and Drew do an excellent job of rehabilitating turtles and housing them until they can be released. One of the things that typically happens is that as humans, we tend to, well, we anthropomorphize things, but we tend to think we know a better place for that turtle. And so somebody may take a turtle and go, well, that looks like a really great pond or wetland. And it may not be the habitat that turtle's either evolved to inhabit, or it could just not be in its range. It could be a wood turtle, and if you put it in a pond, it's not going to do very well because it's a stream turtle. It can't hibernate in a wetland. So contact them. But the other thing that we do, and we're starting to do with eastern box turtles in particular, because they are so rare in the state, is captively rearing them. And so we'll actually collect the eggs, incubate and hatch them, and then raise them in captivity for a year or 2 so that they get a head start on their growth, so that then they can be released and they have a better chance of survival. Again, those hatchlings, when they're walking around the landscape, are prey to almost anything. But a few more inches in diameter, and they have a better shot of surviving. At least a subset of predators.
That's really interesting. I was curious about how easy it is to kind of raise hatchlings from eggs. And Drew did a great job as well on turtle rescue information there. And I think there was another question about from Jamie about can you use stable isotope testing as a tool that can be used to help find where turtles are being trafficked from?
So right now we are using genetic assignment, and so so all of the turtle populations that we study now, there's two things that are happening. One is we're taking genetic samples that are going to a centralized lab for analysis. We're also pit tagging all of our turtles. And so the benefit of pit tagging or microchipping is that when they get confiscated, it's a quick wave of a wand and you get the number off of it, and we can get that turtle. If we get it back, we can get it right back to the population where it came from. Genetic assignment's a little bit different because it's not quite as accurate as we would like. We may be able to like hone it down to watershed, but we might not be able to get that turtle right back to the exact location where it came from, unlike the pit tags. And so that's something that will get better with time. But in the meantime, the pit tagging all of the animals that we track is kind of the number one and most accurate way of tracking.
Okay, that's interesting as well. So another question about protecting the nest of a turtle. What is the best method for protecting turtle nests? And you had mentioned raccoons and their accessibility. Is there anything that, I think it's probably a careful thing. You don't want to disturb a nest either, but any recommendations there?
Yeah, so if you're in an area where you see a lot of nest predation, you can put a cage around the nest to protect it from raccoons. You really have to kind of first you got to be careful. You got to know right where that nest is. It's got to be big enough so that you can sort of dig it down a little bit so a raccoon can't just flip it off. They have those little hands and they're really good at just kind of whipping trash can lids off and everything else. Um, so it won't necessarily stop them. So you got to dig it down a little bit. But the other thing is that turtle nests, the scent associated with laying is temporary for the most part. And so after the first few days, the scent is pretty much dissipated, washed away, especially after some rain. And so that nest is relatively safe after the first few days. So usually if somebody puts a cage around a nest, I usually have them do that for a couple weeks and then take it off and then let the process go on. Um, the type of cage that you put around it is important to consider because you don't want to leave it on there and have the hatchlings come out of the ground and actually be trapped in there. But you also don't want to have something that's going to shade the nest because the temperature of that nest is critical for incubation. And so sun directly on that soil is what they need. So something even as simple as like hardware cloth, where it's just a half-inch square opening, might just shade it enough when that sun's coming on the southwest that it could be a problem for incubation.
Would you recommend um, New Hampshire Turtle Rescue again in that kind for assistance with that kind of work, or Fish and Game, or
I would certainly say that you could reach out to me or Drew and Dallas at New Hampshire Turtle Rescue for guidance. Typically we're not going to be coming out to put cages around nests unless it's in a real like hotspot priority area for us. Because we're kind of, during the active season, we're bouncing all over the place. But definitely reach out. We can help you and talk you through it and anytime on that.
excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then another quick question about subsidized, not sure what you meant by subsidized predation. And then Kathleen responded that the humans create improved opportunities for predators. Is
Yeah,
that
so raccoons are like, that's why they call them trash pandas. They do very well in human dominated landscapes. So they eat a lot of the things that we put out, whether it's, chicken food or corn crops, but compost piles, you name it. Trash, obviously, dumpsters. So that's why we say subsidized because typically in a natural landscape, that one that's not dominated by humans, those populations are much less. So there's much greater biodiversity, more competition, just less raccoons.
Cool. Okay. Can you use DNA testing to determine if a stream supports wood turtles? eDNA testing?
Yeah, so eDNA testing can be done, and it's pretty amazing that um, they can actually come up with population estimates based on eDNA. We haven't gone into that yet. So one of the benefits of the grants that we've been lucky enough to get awarded is that we've gone out and we've surveyed streams for years and years. And so we have a really good idea of where these turtles are and what kind of stream feature they're going to be in. And so we can predict with pretty decent accuracy whether or not there's going to be a wood turtle population there, just based on aerial images and other stream features that are available. Um, so, so to answer the question, yes, it can be used, and it's being used effectively for other species of turtles and amphibians, actually. But we haven't gone down that road yet.
Great. Okay. And there was a question about musk turtles that you did not mention musk turtles.
I did not, and so they're one of the ones that are considered secure.
Okay.
Although I would say that there's more to be discovered there. There's some indication that throughout the region there's some decline, and it's unclear as to why. But we have not monitored musk turtles. They seem to be there seems to be densities in certain areas and completely absent from other ones. It's sort of hard to predict where they're going to be. I know a handful where I can comfortably say I can go there and find a musk turtle. Other places that are exactly the same in terms of habitat, and they're just not there. So that's something that we'll, eventually look at. But again, they're considered a common species, but the we can't take that for granted.
Yep. Okay, great. A couple more questions if we have time. I want to make sure Lauren has plenty of time to go as well. But who are you partnering with on the CR program?
CR program?
Maybe it was our program. I'm not sure. There's
RCN?
also, that's all right. Well, we can follow up. The other question was about the radio tracker. It looks very large and could be easily snagged. How how careful are you? Are you assured that it's the best, that the tracking device isn't affecting them?
Yeah. So yeah, one of the benefits of having transmitters on them is that you can sort of watch them carefully, so you always know where they are, when to look for them, and so we've observed them for quite a while, and there's been studies on whether or not there's an effect on their behavior. But we basically follow a ratio where that transmitter isn't more than 3% of its body weight. And so it may look a little large on their back, but it doesn't interfere with mating or nesting. It doesn't even affect hibernating when they go digging into the ground or digging down into wetland substrates. We've never had a situation where we've found a turtle stuck, or there was any indication that the transmitter caused mortality or impediment of any kind.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna try to just fit in one more question. How can a municipality find out if you've sampled in their community?
Send me an email or give me a call.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
so
then,
the
yeah,
turtle, I just wanted to point out that the highest priority areas for all of these turtles, it's pretty sensitive information, because in the wrong hands it could point poachers to those spots. But I'm happy to share with anybody in the Conservation Commission
nice.
whether we've been there and monitored.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then one quick question, can you tell the type of turtle by the shell remnants in the nest?
Sometimes it depends on how old they are, but usually I'll take those eggs if they've been predated by a raccoon. That's usually when you see the fragments, is when they've been dug up by a raccoon or a skunk. You can soak them in water and you can sort of restore the shape. And so, snapping turtle eggs are round ping pong ball looking eggs. Painted turtles are small and a little bit more papery, but then blandings and wood turtles are oval eggs, a little bit more leathery. And so we can come close. It's not always a guarantee, but we try.
Awesome. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Josh. Really
Thank
great
you.
information. And again, we'll follow up with the links to resources and other information. And if you do have additional questions for Fish and Game, either reach out to me or we can connect you with Josh's contact information. So you can get those questions answered. So it looks like Lauren's ready to go. And I was at another conference recently, and Lauren was presenting this information on culverts and mortality in turtles here in New Hampshire. And I thought this would be a great program for Conservation Commission members to learn about. So thank you so much, Lauren, for being here today. We really appreciate the work that you do and any information that you can share with us that can help commissions better protect turtles. We're all ears.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the invite. Just to make sure you can see the slide and not the notes, right?
Right,
Perfect.
you're in the right
Okay,
view.
awesome. Well, hello everyone. As a refresh, I am a grad student at the University of New Hampshire, and my thesis has been studying how to reduce road mortality, specifically of blandings turtles. So all right, I'm pretty confident I can kind of go through this slide quickly because Josh did an excellent job of setting me up. But basically the takeaway is that blanding turtles are very vulnerable to road mortality. This is a graph of a survey that was recently released. So last summer, there was a conference or a meeting of a bunch of turtle experts, and these experts were surveyed and asked what they thought were the greatest threats specifically to blandings turtles. And the highest ranked threat was the threat of adult road mortality, specifically ranking 4.5 out of 5. Similarly, they were also asked about conservation actions being conducted in each of their regions. And while road mortality was the greatest perceived threat, it is lacking in the number of actions taken to mitigate road mortality. So there's a bit of a gap there that we need to figure out how can we successfully mitigate one of the biggest threats to blanding turtles to ensure that their populations remain healthy and sustainable. So Josh touched on this, but one of the conundrums here is the fact that the blanding turtle range overlaps quite well with the high population density and growing population density in New Hampshire. So this is going to be a region where with more people becomes more infrastructure, more roads, more road crossings that turtles will have to take in order to complete their annual movements and migrations. So this is going to be an example specifically of a wetland crossing. There's kind of the rough outline of the wetland, and there is the road bisecting it. So if a turtle wanted to cross from the south to the north or the north to the south part of the wetland, they have to go over this road. And this case in particular, this is the only culvert connecting the wetted areas. It's a hydraulic culvert and it is screened on the inlet. So there is no physical way for an animal to pass through this culvert to get to the other side. So that means if they wanted to move across the wetland successfully, they would have to go on the road where there are cars. And just a warning, on the next slide, I have a picture of a dead turtle, but I include this just to make the point that this is the consequences of these situations. So this is the site that I monitored last year. That is a dead blandings turtle that I found almost directly above the blocked culvert. So we've set up the problem here that there are wetlands that are bisected by roads, but we also know that eco-passages have a precedence for success. So most of the time, or some of the time, if we think about eco-passages, we picture these grand bridges over highways. These are some of the ones that get the most press, but the underlying idea is that we create an alternative route for wildlife to cross across the road without necessarily having to be on it. And also in New Hampshire, we are lucky that we know where a lot of these hydraulic crossings are. The SAIDS program monitors where wetland crossings occur and take a bunch of measurements about each of these crossings. So part of the grant that Josh was talking about that we worked with UNH and Fish and Game and DES, we were looking at the different crossings in New Hampshire and wondering if we could use these as potential eco-passages for Blanding's turtles. So this broke down into two more specific research questions. The first being, how do we determine which of these sites are the riskiest? And then second, how can we design eco-passages that will effectively allow Blanding's turtles to travel through a wetland? So kind of breaking that into two questions. To answer the first question, we did some literature reviews. We read case studies about crossings that have been constructed. We visited with Massachusetts Fish and Game and DOT, and they took us to some of their newer constructed sites and talked about the benefits and different design characteristics. And through all of that, we created this ranking model. So the goal of this model, if you can see this continuum at the bottom, is to rank a select group of culverts. So if you know that you have 10, 15, 20 culverts of interest, you can put them through this model, and the end result is hopefully that some will come out as a higher risk than others. So this model is broken into 3 overall questions. The first being, is the culvert passable? So that picture that I showed you earlier, that would be a no. There's a screen in front of it, so an animal cannot get through it. There are some other underlying questions to this one, asking about if the structure has collapsed, if it is perched, and other characteristics about it, but you get a yes or no for that. The second question is it easy for a Blanding turtle to travel from the surface of the wetland to be on the road? And we call that road accessibility. And again, there are some other calculations underneath that, talking about how steep the slope is, how long the road and water wetland connection is, if there is a riparian continuity. So is it a smooth surface or smooth substrate and vegetation to walk up, or are there rocks? Is it hard to climb from the water to the road? You get a yes or no for that. And then the third question is asking, is there a line of sight visible? So line of sight, particularly for Blandings in the literature, has been shown to be really important, so that when there is a light through a tunnel, Blanding turtles much more often will venture into that tunnel than if it is dark. So in New Hampshire, we had over 250 culverts that we looked at specifically that were in the Blandings range and that connected to wetlands. And we passed them through this model, and we put them into 4 different bins: high, medium low, and low risk. One thing I want to point out, because this will come up later, is that it is the second question here. Is it easy for Blandings to access the road? If it is yes, they all of those culverts get shunted into these top 2, high risk and medium risk. And then the no gets into medium low and low risk. So these are some examples of those 4 different bins. So these highest risk outlined in red. So the culvert here is completely collapsed. There's no passage through it, and it is very easy to access the road. On the opposite end of the spectrum is this sort of box culvert, where it is very easy for an animal to cross through the culvert, but getting up onto the road is going to be a much more difficult process. And we've grouped the high and the medium high risk into one category, and then the low, medium, and the low risk into a second category for analysis purposes. And now that we've had this model that we created, we want to know, is our model correct? Can we field truth it? So what I did this past summer is I selected 18 of these sites. 9 of them were in those high risk categories, 9 of them were in the lower risk categories. And throughout the months of May and July, I went to each site on a weekly basis. And each time I visited, I walked up and down the site and I counted and recorded how many turtle roadkill I saw. I also had 2 cameras set up at each site. One camera was positioned on the road directly above the culvert, so I could capture any images of turtles on the road or using the road. So that's this lower picture right here. And I also had cameras set up focused on the culvert itself, so I could potentially capture any images of turtles interacting with that culvert. So I'm gonna get a little bit into the weeds on the numbers here, but then I'll pull it back out to bigger conclusions. So for the camera pictures, and these are going to be just the camera pictures of the roads. For each instance that I saw a turtle, I labeled it either as a known dead, where I saw it get hit by a car, a known alive, where I saw it completely pass from one embankment all the way to the other, or an assumed alive, where I saw the turtle on the road. I didn't see it fully cross, but there was no evidence of roadkill. If you total all of those numbers for each site, and then divide it by the number of days that the camera was out there to standardize it across all of the sites, you get a number of turtles observed on the road per day. And if you compare the mean number of that in the high risk versus the low risk category, it's approaching significance. So in science, we typically use 0.05 of a p-value as a cutoff. Anything below that is considered significant. This cutoff, or this p-value, is 0.07. I'm going to call it approaching significance. And that is the difference between the low and low medium risk and the high and high medium risk category. So there were more turtles on the road in those higher risk category sites. Culvert passability is weaker. I'm going to move on from that. This is a figure showing the number of turtles observed on the roads using the cameras, broken down into 4 different groups, not just the 2 with that p-value. And again, none of these break that 0.05 significance level, but you can see here that these high risk categories have a bit more variance in those numbers of turtles on the road per day. But also the mean here is slightly higher than the others. That was the camera data. That was turtles on the road, dead or alive. This is the roadkill data. So these are known dead turtles that I observed each week walking up and down the site. And this time we're asking, is there a difference in the total number of dead turtles observed on the roads for the rubric ranking high versus low? And again, this is a weaker p-value, doesn't broach that 0.05, not as close as the 0.07 either. Culvert passability, that's not a significant number at all. But we can say that a turtle was, in this study, in this field season, a turtle was 3 times more likely to be found dead on one of the higher risk roads than the lower risk. Okay, coming out of those p-values, out of that stats, we can conclude that road accessibility and culvert passability may be successful if you would like to determine which sites will have turtles on the road or not. It does a less successful job suggesting which turtles are found dead on those roads. So there's a little bit of a difference between just being on the road or being on the road and dead. what might be some of those other factors that may impact being dead on the road. I went into New Hampshire Granite, which is publicly available road data, and I was comparing the number of total dead turtles on the road with the width of the road. So you have 2 lanes, and then some sites had wider shoulders. Some sites had no shoulders at all. So there was some variation in the distance that a turtle will have to cross in order to completely cross over the road. And there was a significant positive slope with that. Speed limit also saw a significantly positive trend where the greater the speed limit, the greater total dead turtles observed. Though I do want to point out that these R-squared values are on the lower side. So saying that there is some variation unaccounted for in these univariate linear regression models. This is the annual average daily traffic. So we're looking at how many cars on average pass the site in a day. This R-squared value is much higher, 0.7. So there's less variation along this line. And also it's a significant positive trend. So as traffic density increases, the number of roadkill at the site increases. So when we're trying to consider which sites might be riskiest for turtle road mortality, we can look at road accessibility that was shown to have smaller p-values than culvert passability. And then road width, speed limit, and annual average daily traffic. I put pluses next to these just to show that these are positive relationships. So as those increase, the trend is that roadkill also increases. That goes towards picking locations to focus on piling resources for these potential culvert restorations, because we know that there's limited time, there's limited money, and some are going to have to be prioritized over others. I mentioned that I had cameras focused on the culverts. There was less useful data that came from these for a couple of reasons that I'm happy to get into later if there are questions, but I don't feel comfortable making broad statements about them. I'll just say that these are 2 examples where there's a turtle crossing into this culvert here, and then a bigger snapper is walking out of the box culvert down here. In both of these instances, there was a full line of sight, and it is a culvert width of greater than 3 feet. To get to the second question, the design of these eco-passages. So this is the picture that I showed earlier that had the dead landings associated with it. We have created, Tom Ballestero helped a lot on this, creating some conceptual engineering designs. So if we were looking at this site and we wanted to make it better, make it a more successful eco-passage, what are some of the things that we could do for this site? For goal 1, which the stats have shown us that road accessibility is important to the amount of roadkill seen or the amount of turtles seen on the roads. We want to prevent turtles from accessing those roads. The ways to do that are by putting riprap or retaining walls on the embankments, or putting fences up. Fences are really important if done well and maintained, to prevent animals from getting onto the road. And so in this example, we have fences lining either side of the road that are curved back towards the road, so that if an animal reaches the end of the fence, they're guided towards the wetlands and can't really circumnavigate the fence as easily. The second goal would be to allow turtles to access the eco-passage. So this is to the goal of letting those turtles still have that movement across wetlands. Things that would allow animals to use the eco-passage would be removing the screens, would be putting in a floodplain culvert. So this is a culvert a little bit higher up. It's typically dry, but it's another way that a turtle could pass underneath the road, and ensuring that a line of sight is visible all the way through the tunnel. And then a third goal could be alerting motorists to the presence of turtles. So this could be putting up signs, temporary speed bumps, or those signs that flash when you're going over the speed limit. Those are all ways of getting motorists to slow down. One last thing I want to share with everyone. So this is the design guidance for these sites that has come out of this grant. This is a QR code. So if you follow that, or if you put this URL in, you can pull up this design guidance document. It's on the Fish and Game website, but it has all of our recommendations on it that we've put together towards fencing. So this is an example of a cross section of a fence that we think is successful at preventing turtles specifically from getting onto the roads. It talks about letting light in for that line of sight, potential skylights, or this is a great example here. So this is a full line of sight. It is bright inside the tunnel, not just at the end of it. Signs, temporary signs, not having signs up all year long in order to prevent driver habituation. But yeah, I can leave that up there if people are interested. So that all of that information, a lot of what I shared is up in there. That model that I shared is up in this document as well, and a lot of good information on that. But I'm happy to take questions. That was a lot of information, I know, but hopefully this document in particular is going to be a really helpful resource. So thank you for listening.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. We will be happy to share that link, and maybe if you can get us a copy of the program, we can send it out as PDF to the group, and that way they can access the links and the resources that were mentioned in your PowerPoint. Yeah. So again, thank you. I think this was great information, and I think looking at your culverts and other access for your turtles and especially considering these major crossings and roads can really be an important way to look at protecting turtles in your community. So if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand or unmute. I don't see too many in the chat box. So if everybody has had their questions answered, thank you so much for joining us. Again, we'll be sending out the recording tomorrow with more links and resources. But if you have any other questions, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I can check in with Josh or Lauren on any of the questions you might have. So again, thanks for joining us, and we'll keep you posted on any of this great information that we'd be happy to share with you. Any final questions out there?
Just to thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. It's like I said, it's great information, and everybody loves turtles, so it's really important to do this work. And I do know of many towns that are working on doing a better job of protecting those turtle crossings, amphibian crossings. I think there's a lot of good work going on out there, and the more that commissions understand how they can help, the better job they can do. So appreciate that. And this is really kind of, hot off the presses. So it's great to get this information out there as soon as we can. And we'll definitely include that link to the guidance document for wetland crossing. And we'll keep you posted on any other new developments for turtles out there in New Hampshire. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great afternoon. We will be continuing our Lunch and Learn program with the ARM Fund, an overview of the ARM Fund, and that's going to be March 27th. So if you have any plans to apply for a wetland mitigation funding from DES, please join us for that program, and you'll get some more details on how that process works. And that, again, is March 27th. So Thank you all again for joining us today and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.